Welcome everyone to the North Carolina Department of Information Technology's Division of Broadband and Digital Opportunities webinar on Great Grant Location Data. Thank you so much for joining us today. I wanted to do a few pieces of housekeeping first. One, to let you know that this is being recorded. We will add both this recording as well as the slides to our website, which is ncbroadband.gov. Maybe later today, maybe first thing Monday, depending upon how quickly we can turn this around. As well, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat feature. We will answer questions at the end, so please do put your questions as you come up with them in the chat, and we will get to them at the very end. I'm joined here today by quite a few of my colleagues: Angie Bailey, Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office; George Collier, Deputy Director of the Broadband Infrastructure Office; and Ben Shelton, our GIS Project Manager for the Center for Geographic Information and Analysis. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Angie Bailey.
Thank you, Crystal. Good morning, everybody. And welcome all our great grantees. I want to first recognize all the work that you are doing to build broadband across the state. Our window is getting short to finish all these builds, and so we know everyone's busy, and we appreciate y'all being on with us. So today, just quickly, our kind of structure for the day, I'm going to talk a little bit about the purpose of why we're here. Ben is going to talk about the data files and the crosswalk methodology. George is going to talk about issues around the Great Grant Agreements. And then, as Crystal mentioned, so because this deals with contractual issues, we expect questions. We will probably publish an FAQ doc just so that we have the answers, questions and answers in writing at some point after today. So that's what we're doing with this hour. Next slide, please. All right, so I think everybody knows our Great Grant projects. We launched the Great Grant program in early 2022. So that was before the FCC was using the broadband data collection data set and location level data. And so we define the projects in our applications and in our contracts in the address NC data set, as you all know. And so the issue over the years, as the FCC switched to broadband serviceable locations, is that we have to report the projects to U.S. Treasury and BSLs, and of course you all report to the FCC and BSLs as locations are served. So we're trying to figure out how to join the two data sets. And as we work to, especially now as Great Grant projects are closing out, how we can validate these projects, the final builds. And we really have to standardize the certification process and the review process for validating these final locations. So we need to recognize one set of BSLs for each project. We've got to then add this file into the Great Grant Agreements, and then that will allow you all to report to us on your final builds as BSLs. And we know that this is, in some ways it's straightforward, in some ways there's a lot of complexities, but we've got to get through this process together because we don't really have a choice. So just to stress, this update does not change the address data set that's in your grant agreement. You know, these were the addresses you were supposed to build to or have to build to, but it's defining the BSLs that spatially match to those addresses in your contract. And of course, we know the final location counts, as well as the household and business designations, are going to be different in the BSL data set. But again, that's just where we are as a country. Next slide. And so the process, Center for Geographic Information and Analysis, CGIA, has developed a BSL file for each project. The grant management team in the Broadband Infrastructure Office has uploaded those files into the Enterprise Business Services System for your specific grant project. And then we sent an email to everybody, all the great grantees, on December 5th, where we reference this Excel file that now lives in your EBS, and it contains the location IDs for the BSLs for each project. We provided in that email a crosswalk methodology, and that email came out from the Great Grant email address. Provided the crosswalk methodology as a PDF for y'all to review. We notified y'all of today's webinar, and then there's a link to sign up for consultation hours with CGIA. So basically, where we are right now is coordinating with you all, with each grantee on the BSL file for each project. We've got to get on the same page on that exact BSL for every great grant project, and then we will issue great grant amendments. So that's where we are. Again, I'm going to turn it over to Ben, who's going to talk about the data files and the crosswalking. Thank y'all.
Thanks, Angie. And as Angie mentioned, you know, we've done a lot of due diligence, and we've made the best effort to try to spatially crosswalk all of those project addresses from the address NC data set over into the BSLs, into the Fabric. And just first off, this is what would be in the data files that we're going to provide. In that data file, it will be all BSLs. It will have a location ID field. That is what you can use to join to your version of the Fabric locally to map this in your own systems. That's the first field there in that first red highlight. And then we have the unit count field that's coming straight from the Fabric. So for multi-unit buildings, you know, the Fabric kind of takes a different approach than Address NC, and it has a unit count, so you can see how many units are in that broadband serviceable location. We've also taken there in column 2 is the location type code. We've taken all of the Fabric land use codes, and we've kind of tried to translate those into businesses and residences, because that's, you know, kind of what the contract language is talking in. So what we've done is anything that had a residential or mixed use code in the Fabric, we've gone ahead and made that a residential value in that column. All other codes, we've gone to business, because there's about a dozen or so codes that the Fabric may contain in their land use code. So we just wanted to consolidate that into 2 main codes, residences and businesses. Then there's some grant information, you know, the program, grantee, Grant County. The agreement number is actually going to be in the file naming convention that we're using. So in that file name, you'll see it'll have that agreement number and the county and provider all listed right in the file name. But all the other project information is here in these other fields. And then importantly, and George will get into this a little bit, is a broadband access field there at the end. This is going to be what you use to report back to us when submitting progress reports or end of construction reports, to note all the locations that do have access after the project is complete. So we're trying to standardize that field a little bit, just so we get a uniform data file from each provider, that we don't have to kind of guess, you know, what the formats and what the values that you may be using mean. George will kind of outline what those 2 values, but it'll just be a simple yes, no on each location. Next slide, please. So getting into like how we did the crosswalk, and I'll kind of reiterate it several times. We did a spatial match. We didn't do an address to address type match, but I'll get you into some examples of how we did that. Here are the 4 data sets that we used to get to our crosswalk methodology. So first and foremost is the Address NC data set that all of those great grant contracts were using as the location data set. So that data is coming straight from the NextGen 911 system in the state. We leverage that data into a product called Address NC. It does a lot of standardization, and we develop geocoders and other things. If you're interested in more on that, that's on NC1 map. So we've taken that, and that's what the projects were defined on. So it may have more locations than what the broadband serviceable location Fabric might have, because that FCC data set is more targeted, a more narrow data set that's supposed to represent only locations that are serviceable by mass market internet service. So that's, you know, it takes out all the vacant lots and barns and outbuildings supposedly, to be a little bit more narrow and focused on those broadband serviceable locations. So those are the 2 location data sets, but to translate between the 2, we use the North Carolina Emergency Management Building Footprint data set. So this data set is used in disaster response and emergency management's work, and it outlines the structure or footprint of every building in the state. And so we use those as a first step, And then we also use the statewide parcels that is maintained by my group, CJA. So we have a transformer that we compile parcels from every state or county organization that does land records management, the tax offices and such. And we get all of that property boundary information and compile it statewide. Well, we use that as kind of the second step in our crosswalk process. If you go to the next slide, please. So here's kind of the methodology, kind of boiled down into a few steps, just to highlight how we went about this. First, we would take all of those project addresses and we would join them spatially to the statewide building footprint data set. So that would kind of get a footprint ID on every address NC for that project. And then using the BSLs that have the same spatial join performed on that building footprint data set, then we can kind of do a join that says, okay, this address is on the same building as this BSL. And so in doing so, you're kind of matching at a very specific location level. Whether the addresses match or all the other fields match, doesn't matter. Spatially, this address is on the same building as this BSL. So that kind of matched a lot of our locations from the address NC data sets over into the BSLs. Well, then what we're left with is all the BSLs that didn't match. There was no join. It wasn't either the address NC data set was outside the building footprint, or there was no building footprint if the building footprint data set was incomplete there, especially for new builds, or the BSL was not on that building. So in those instances, what we did is we used the statewide parcel data. We did the same kind of spatial join. You join all those unmatched addresses to parcels, you join the BSLs to the same parcels, and then you kind of do a tabular match to say this address is on the same parcel as this BSL. We did a lot of different steps and intricate kind of validating of all of these results, especially on parcels that were quite large. So we understand that an address and a BSL being on a very large parcel may not mean it's the same location. So we did do some extra matching and some extra kind of manual validation on those kind of scenarios. But in the end, what we do is we merge the matches from the building footprints and the matches from the parcels, and that is the resulting BSL file that we've now created. So we're doing everything spatially. We're not really trying to get into the address-to-address matching, because we found when doing that, sometimes the location of that address, when you translate it to BSLs, could be down the street or on the next street over. The addresses in that BSL data set are kind of inconsistent in their accuracy. So we just wanted to do things spatially, represent a project area to project area, regardless of what the address strings are on those data sets. Next slide, please. Here's a quick example of one area. In this map, you have the address NC locations of the project are in the yellow triangles. And then the blue dots behind that are the results of the crosswalk into BSLs. So in this, you can see there are many of them matched on a building. So there's a BSL and an address on the same building. And those are that's really the best case scenario, because then it's a clean match. We know this is the same structure, the same location, and it's easy to crosswalk. What you see circled in white there, that is a building that had 2 address NC points, but only 1 BSL. So that's kind of the difference on how those data sets handle multi-unit buildings. Address NC will have a point for every unit. So if it's a big apartment complex, you'll see a bunch of points all on the same structure. Well, the BSLs typically are just 1 point with a units field. So you'll see that the number of points may go down, but the units in the BSLs will kind of add up a little bit to what's on that same building. And in this example, we had 13 BSLs that resulted from 17 address NC points. And we feel that this still represents the same project area per se. There are some instances like right in the middle where an address NC point is just kind of on a vacant lot. I think that's actually a cemetery, where that is an addressed location in address terms, but in terms of a broadband serviceable location, it doesn't really meet that definition of needing mass market internet. So in that case, that's not really a buildable location. And so that's okay, and that the resulting BSL still represents that project area. You go to the next slide. So, and this is another example of quite often what you'll find in a lot of these projects are the address NCs are on, subdivided subdivision where there's a lot of empty lots. And so those empty vacant lots, those yellow triangles in this example, do not have a BSL because there is no structure on those lots. And so in those instances, the BSLs will just not represent those vacant lots. It kind of takes out that problem of how to report vacant lots and access on those lots. But then you see that there's a lot of BSLs there that street will get access. And then the white circles in this example, those are the BSLs that were matched using parcels, because the building footprint, if you look at those, either the address NC point is not on the same footprint, so you couldn't do that spatial join using building footprints. You had to kind of then go to the next step of getting the parcel on that address NC point intersection, and then the same BSL that intersects that same parcel. That is then represented in the project file because of the parcel matching. So as you can see, this is you'll see dramatic changes in the numbers, and so just be prepared for that. But we feel that spatially it still represents the same project area and probably more accurately depicts those locations that need that broadband service, whereas the address NC may be overstating the locations. And then, we're providing the data files. And if George hasn't done it, he can probably do it soon. And after you get a chance to map it and take a look at it on your own end, we do have office hours set up. We have some booking, Microsoft bookings available that you can go in and book a 30-minute time slot on my calendar. So this is the availability for those time slots currently, and then we can kind of work through specific project questions that you may have about your data files, go through more examples of the crosswalk methodology in your specific data sets, and just kind of get any questions answered that you may have before we get into these grant amendments that George will detail here in a bit. But just wanted to note that this is the availability, and I think the slide is at the end too, so you can get those times at the end of this meeting. But happy to talk about this. We know it's a lot of data and it's a lot of process to get to where we are. I didn't note this is all in version 5 of the BSLs because we have been really diligently working in version 5 for a lot of different programs. So we feel that that is the most defined crosswalk that we've done the most validation on. So just note that all of these data files will be in version 5 of the Fabric. So when you get these data files and you map them locally, just make sure you're using that version. Otherwise, you may not join all the records in that Excel table because some of them may be removed or changed since then. All I had. Yes.
Ben, thank you. And just to clarify to everyone on the call, all BSL data files were updated to the EBS agreement record for each project. And then, again, this is just for the Great Grant Program. We'll answer any other questions about CAB at a separate venue at a separate time. But all of the files have been updated to the EBS. So thank you all for joining the meeting. So I always have the fun part because I talk about the terms and conditions of the grant agreement. So what does all of this mean in terms of the BSL data set or data file? I just kind of want to review just some of the items that all the ISPs committed to. All the executed grant agreements, committed to providing broadband access. The GREAT program is a broadband access program, not a subscription. There's not a required subscription component. And there is a definition of broadband access in each of the grant agreements. Broadband access is considered available if the internet carrier can provide broadband service to a location immediately or within 10 business days upon request and without cost to the customer other than standard connection fees. So that's the intent of our program. So once all of these locations have you've deployed the infrastructure, these locations must have broadband access. Also, another important reminder is that all these contracted projects were the high scoring projects based on the legislatively prescribed scoring matrix, and the households and businesses that the providers committed to were factored into that scoring matrix, as well as the total project costs. Just to reiterate, this update of the data set does not change the address data set in the grant agreement, but it is defining the BSLs that spatially match to these addresses. And, and what this will do, it will also give us a consistent reporting tool to U.S. Treasury and what the ISPs are reporting to the FCC. With this update, we have to incorporate the BSL data file and the updated location counts in the GRANT grant agreement. And we have to do that through the contract amendment. When we uploaded all of these data files to the GRANT grant agreement records in the Enterprise Business Services online portal, it is under the agreement section. So when you log in, it'll be under the agreement section of the portal. And the naming convention starts with the provider name, your grant agreement number, which starts with the 2 and then with 4 zeros following that, along with some unique numbers, the county name, and then the version, the fabric version of the BSL in the GRANT program name, and it is an Excel file. So when you go into the attachment section of the agreement, you can sort the files in the attachments. You could sort by descending, meaning the most current uploaded document should show up, and most of these should say have a range of December 2nd through December 5th. Before we sent out that email on December 5th, we uploaded each of those data files. Next slide, please. So what will be amended in the agreement? So the following sections will be amended in the agreement. There is a repayment requirement section. I think it was stated that some of the locations counts will be, or may be reduced. So we also have to update the repayment section, repayment requirement section in the main agreement. This will also update the Exhibit B, which states the number of locations to be served by the project. And then Exhibit I is the map and the reference to the BSL file that we agree upon. So I think it's very important to note that the amendment will not change the grant amount unless there are locations that will not have broadband access as a result of the project. And we'll have to evaluate the office, your assigned project manager, myself, Ben, and really the greater office will have to evaluate each rationale on why BSL will not be served. And just to note that BSL file that we are providing or have provided, once we incorporate that into our grant agreement amendment, that BSL file is the only acceptable file for certifying broadband access. Next slide, please. And I'm not going to go through bullet points number 1 and 2. I think Ben did a great job with doing that, but I would like to highlight bullet point 3. So when you get this, when we have an agreed upon file and incorporate that into an amendment, this file will be used for you all. You all use this file to certify what locations have broadband access. You'll use that in arrow number 3 here. There is a column in your file that should have broadband access, and that's using the definition that's in your grant agreement. It's a drop-down toolbar. You'll go to each location and use that drop-down toolbar to identify yes or no that particular BSL has broadband access. This will be the only file we'll use for your certification and when you submit your end of construction period report to the Compliance and Grants Management Unit. And I believe all of your assigned project managers, grant managers, and their supervisors are on the call or are on this call right now. They'll work with you all, around that end of construction period report. But just to reiterate, this is the only file that we will accept, for certification. And it does a couple of things. I think Ben said it and Angie said it earlier. It streamlines our review process, and it gives us one common data set to work from. Next slide. So what are the next steps? We're requiring you all, or asking you all, strongly recommending you all review the BSL data file that's in the Great Grant Agreements in the EBS. Please schedule time during the mapping office hours with specific questions about the BSL data file for your projects. You know, and then if you see any concerns or issues with the file, then please identify those in writing and submit those to the Great Grant email address, copy your grant manager, and me. We'd like to have all of these issues identified by January 9th, because we are going to incorporate these files into an amendment beginning in January 6th. So there's some other administrative updates, you know, that we'll have to do as part of that amendment process. But we need to have all this data shored up by the time we do our amendment. So next week, the week of December 15th, our office will email and summary of the full scope of the amendments that will happen in 2026. There's some administrative issues and items that we needed to clear up in the Great Grant Program that we're going to handle you know, when we send out these amendments. Next slide, please. Now I think this is a good time, and we left some time for you all to ask any high-level questions. Any specific questions, we want to reserve that for you know, the office hours. The specific questions around the BSL data files, we want to reserve that for the office hours. But if y'all have any high-level questions now, we'll be happy to answer those.
Thanks, George. We had a few in the chat already. For those folks that joined a little later, want to let you know, oh, and there's one now. So as folks are joining, please put your messages, your questions in the chat feature, and we'll answer them. And this meeting is being recorded, and the meeting recording as well as the slides will be put on our website soon. So with that, I'm gonna hand over a few questions. I'm gonna send this one back to you, George, because I just would like for you to confirm what grants are going to be affected in this.
This is the Great Grant Program that utilize the Address NC data set. So the CAB program is already using the BSL version 5 Fabric data set. So it is only the Great Grant Program. I saw that Andy mentioned that he could not locate the CAB, the Excel file for the CAB projects. We'll go back and get that for you, Andy. You should already have it as part of your contracting, but we can get that into the EBS as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. And Ben, can you elaborate a little bit on what version 5 is?
Right, version 5. So every 6 months we get a new version of the Fabric, and then a few months later we get the availability. Version 5 was what was used for the availability as of June 30th, 2024. So that was the provider reported service as of June 30th. And I believe that Fabric location data set was released in December 2023 to get ready for the reporting period for that year. So that's when it was released. It was released December 2023, and then the availability data was released June 30th of 2024.
Wonderful. I've had a few folks over here in the chat ask some questions about how to sign up for the mapping meetings, the 30-minute sessions. I'm going to put that link in the chat here. If for some reason that does not work for you, let me scroll back to the dates and times that are available currently. Now, as folks sign up for these slots, it's a 30-minute slot, those times will be removed. So you can only pick one. And once you do, no one else will be able to sign up for that time. So I added that into the chat for everyone.
Crystal, we also sent out 2 emails. So we sent out the December 5th email with the scheduled consultation link, which was broken, and then I sent a follow-up on Monday with the correct link for the consultation. So it's also in the email as well, for you all. The follow-up email on December 8th also has the schedule consultation link, the correct link, the one that's not broken.
Perfect. Okay, and actually, I think the broken link was for this webinar, not for the consultation. So I think those
Okay,
always
okay,
work.
sorry. Yeah,
Always
thank you
work,
for
no
that.
problem.
Yeah.
But what we can do is also send out a reminder later today just about those office hours, just with a link in case anyone can't access the chat later. But very important for you to sign up for those for individual questions. Okay, I have a question on one of our great grants is scheduled to end at the end of this year. Since the contract amendments aren't scheduled to be sent out until January 2026, what does that mean for our project?
Charlie, we're not going to cancel any projects, because of the amendment. But what we're doing is, because there is going to be a bulk amendment sent out. We need to look at if there's any potential extensions to the construction period that's pending. We need to look at that and probably take care of those. Either we'll have to evaluate that, but we're not going to cancel out a project because we're doing this amendment. I'll say that right, on the record at this time. We need to look at specifically the schedule and what needs to happen, and we'll get back with you. I think that's going to be a question that we'll work with your project manager on.
Thanks, George. I've got two follow-up questions. One question is this for the Great Grant Awards for 2022 only?
Yeah, this is for any executed Great Grant project that's under contract. So Kara, it's from that application period of from 2022, and that majority of those were contracted in 2023. Again, this is just for the Great Grant program, not the CAB program. And Tim, it is a good question. Yes, it is also for any program that used the address NC data set, even if it was a Great DeKalb project. So if there's an address NC data set that was used, we are updating those agreements.
Okay. Can you confirm the deadline for by which the crosswalk data must be provided to the office?
January, I think it was January 9th is what we have in the slide.
Correct. Perfect.
And
January 9th, 2026.
Just to add in on that, so we've crosswalked the data and we've provided to the grantees what we believe the BSLs to be. So at some level, it's possible there's not an action on your part except for checking and making sure that you agree. And I guess right, George. I mean, so I guess sorry, I'm thinking out loud. If grantee reviews the data and doesn't have changes, do they just send us an email and say, hey, I agree with this data set?
That would be good.
Okay.
That would be good. Did everybody catch that? If there's no changes to the data set and you all agree, we are asking if you could email greatgrant@nc.gov, your project manager, and copy me and with a statement that you agree with the data set.
Okay. And it looks like we have one more question. I want to confirm that we did get this one on slide 11 here. It says does not change the address data set in the agreement versus slide 12, which says update exhibit B, a stated number of locations. It sounds like it contradicts, but I may be misinterpreting it.
Well, and Angie and Ben, if I misstate something, I'll depend on you. So Tim, earlier on the slides, I think we noted that there is not a direct address to address correlation, and that we are looking at these in a spatial. I lost my train of thought here for a minute, but there's not going to be a direct one-to-one for addresses from address NC to the BSL data set, and that there may be numbers, location counts that are reduced because of that crosswalk. And I think one of the slides that Ben shared earlier, and I think one that Angie addressed earlier, stated that there is not a direct correlation, but we are using this to the BSL data set that spatially matches the addresses from the address NC to BSL. I think, Ben, you showed in one of your slides, you showed that there were 2 address NC points, and that when you did the crosswalk, it reduced those 2 points down to 1 BSL. No, those 2 address NC points down to 1 BSL. So I think Tim Carr, I think that's where we would have a different number of locations, households, and businesses when we update this address NC data set to the BSL location file.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
And I think the intention of that language on slide 11 was to kind of reiterate that this is not changing the project area. The project area is still the project area. The address NC data and the BSL should represent the same project area, but just in different points, different geometries that should spatially correlate to each other. So the addresses didn't change, but and the project area didn't change. It's just the underlying data we're using to track that area, if that makes sense.
We have a follow-up question on that. So it says, as we're finalizing our grants and providing our address lists, do you have an idea of footage difference max that would be considered bad? Are you looking at 500 feet, 1,000 feet?
Bad as in terms of matching the addresses, is that's referring to? We are looking at things in terms of the parcel, and if there's a parcel, I can't remember off the top of my head, if there's a parcel that was many acres, then we did some analysis to make sure that the location, the address in the agreement correlated to the correct BSL. But that was kind of an ad hoc basis. We didn't have like a clear, it was kind of looking at the imagery, looking at the buildings on that parcel and kind of making a determination of where the actual address in the contract was really referring to in that parcel. And sometimes that didn't refer to any BSL because the BSLs were on the other side of the parcel. But in terms of matching address to address, we just didn't do that at all because of that distance. If it moved, sometimes it would move it down the street on another parcel. Well, we didn't want to overlap a different agreement that we may have through a different program over on that parcel. So we just avoided any kind of address matching completely because we were seeing that all over the place. And in some instances, I saw it miles away. The same address was miles away in the BSLs where it was in the address NC data set. And I just don't know where they were deriving those addresses for the BSL data set. Because they were doing it nationally and not using our address NC data.
Tim, if that doesn't answer your question, or if you have a further question, if you could share it. Oh, perfect. He said, I should have specified location and not address. Our lat long versus the BSL lat long being within 500 feet or 1,000 feet. Does that correlate to what you were suggesting, Ben?
Yeah, if it was on the same parcel and that parcel was under our threshold, it didn't matter if it was 1,000 feet or 2 feet. It was correlated to be the same location. And I think that may be some of the is that we need to discuss. If there's, we tried to limit it based on that parcel size, but if you disagree with that location not being the same address, that's really the cases I think that we need to discuss together. And if there's differing opinions of what is your project area in that version 5 of the BSLs, we can talk about how to convey those locations to us so that we can validate this further. But we've done a lot of work on our end of cleaning all of this up. And I think the majority of the cases look very clean, like the examples that I showed, that should have limited issues.
Thank you, Ben. We have 2 extra questions on deadlines. What is the deadline again for awardees to either send the email to greatgrant@nc.gov or saying that either we agree and there are no changes needed or to disagree? What is that deadline?
January 9th, 2026.
Perfect. Okay. And now we have another deadline question of about the agreements. When the agreements will be sent out in January, what is the deadline for the providers to be able to respond back to those agreements? End of January?
Ask the question. I'm sorry. What was the question again?
The deadline for the agreements that we're going to be making those revisions to.
The amendments, the deadline for the
yes.
amendments.
Mhm.
Once we send out the amendments, we've looked at. I'll have to look back and I think when we've done amendments in the past, it has been 15 days. Maybe 30. It depends, maybe 30. I can't remember, but it's not going to be a 1 day turnaround time. And there is going to be using the standard that we've used in the past, and it's defined in the amendment. So it's been between 15 to 30 days, but I don't know the contract terms off the top of my head, and we'll have to get back with you on that specific answer later.
We'll make sure that that's addressed in the communications to you in January about these amendments.
There's a question from Sherry that the standard you're being held to is the BSL data file. That's the standard. The BSL data file that's in the that's in the agreement record of the EBS in the attachment section. We are amending the agreements to that file and the number of locations that are stated in that file.
Perfect. Are there any other questions that we can add in? Okay, so we have another one. So if the number of locations increase or decrease, the grant amount does not change, is the question.
If you all agree with the data file and you notify us of that, the grant amount will not change. However, if there is an issue that comes up where a provider, and I'm not pointing out any provider, but if a provider says this location will not be served, or we'll have to evaluate the rationale as to why a location will not be served. But on its face value right now, we will not decrease the grant amount. The grant amount's not going to change.
So
Okay, perfect.
Angie, you're breaking up.
Okay.
There you go. You're
So-
on now.
If a project has 200 addresses when it was originally contracted, and that's equal to 175 BSLs, just as an example, there's no penalty for that difference in count. If a grantee says, hey, but we actually can't build to this project area and we're reducing all of these locations, then I mean there would still be a cost of funding that would come back to us for areas that get dropped out, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Okay, I don't see any additional questions. We've got a few minutes, so if anybody wants to add any in, please do so now.
Or if there's a slide that a slide, or if y'all have any questions or about a particular slide, we can go into that kind of detail as well.
While we wait, I'm going to hand it back over to Angie to talk about a resource we have.
Yes. And we've touched on this, but if we could go to the next slide. Oh, there's one more question.
Okay, the question is, since the BSL numbers are lower than the address numbers we committed to, are we looking at having to pay back funds?
No. So the translation between the original addresses and the BSLs, even if there's a difference in count, which we anticipate, there's no penalty for that. There's no repayment. We're just recognizing this second data source because, you know, as a country, everyone's using BSLs now, and we need to make the transition.
And also just want to reiterate too, that all of the GREAT grant federal projects were funded by U.S. Treasury American Rescue Act, American Rescue Plan Act funds. And any state that used our ARPA dollars for broadband are reporting locations on a BSL level, not whatever the state wanted to use. The U.S. Treasury required all the states to report on these broadband programs at a BSL level. So we're again, the purpose of this is to streamline our grant administration processes and verification processes, but also to meet the requirements from U.S. Treasury.
So we just really want to, I know it's kind of a lot. In some ways, again, it's straightforward. In some ways, it feels like a lot. We really want to encourage you to please use time and book some time with CGIA. If you have mappers, even if you have to get your consultants, and I get there's costs with that, it's just really important that we shore up these files. We just want to have a very focused effort on this because there's so much happening. There's so many other programs, and we just need to make this window to get aligned on these files. So please reach out to CGIA. You're going to need to work with your grant manager still on regular GREAT grant questions on these contract amendments, but we really, they are not responsible for mapping and working with you on the data file, the data in the data files. So we just ask you to please book some time with CGIA for Ben and his team. And so there's a link that Crystal put in the chat, and there's 30-minute time slots available. And then that's the best next step.
I kind of want to answer this last question. I think this is an important question, Angie. This is from one of our team members, Will Thomas, who's one of our compliance supervisors. Crystal, could you go to slide 5, please?
Absolutely.
And Ben, so to answer Will's question, I'll state it out loud. Will this update also change the locations classification? I think, Ben, could you explain bullet point number 2 in your slide deck here?
Right. So the CostQuest location fabric has a field called land use codes, and there's about 12 different land use codes. George and I went through and identified residential and mixed use as those that we wanted to classify as residential locations in the BSL data set. All other codes went into the business category. This may change the residential business breakdown within the project, and I'm not sure the ramifications of that change. But in terms of for tracking the BSLs, those 2 classifications, and that's how we derive them. George, I don't know if you have any input on how that may change anything in the grant agreement amendments. But yeah, we wanted to be able to classify the number of businesses and residences based on that fabric location data set instead of the addresses.
For the GREAT program, we had to, and this is separate. This is separate from the Completing Access to Broadband program, the CAB program. For the GREAT program, because it was legislatively prescribed, we had to identify households and businesses. There is a definition of what that is in the program itself. So if there is because we are using this BSL data set, then we will be updating in the grant agreement. I believe that's Exhibit B. The grant agreement we will be updating the household and business count in the grant agreement in Exhibit B. And we will be using this data file. Again, just to reiterate, this is the data file. This is the source. The office will not accept any other data files or sources in the future. This is for the GREAT program. This is the data file that ISPs and the grantees will need to use to in their end of construction period reports and providing or certifying which of these BSLs have broadband access.
And just to touch on that, so in your grant agreements, really, well, really for all the programs, once you finish a build, I mean, the expectation is that gets reported to the FCC as a served location with whatever tech type and speed you're providing. And so what you're providing to the FCC, I mean, really needs to match what you're providing to us. So it shouldn't be extra work. It should be that these are the BSLs. You'd be reporting on this once these locations are served to the FCC anyway.
And Angie, I think that's a good point, but also want to point out another contracting commitment that all of our providers in the GREAT program committed to. When they were awarded, there was a prescribed set of a prescribed criteria, that scoring matrix that was included in our authorizing legislation. So there was a base speed multiplier, which is the speeds that GREAT grant grantees are committing to providing to these locations. But also there was a tech type, right? There was a technology type that they committed to in the application. And we had no, all of our 100% of our GREAT grant projects committed to fiber to the home, fiber to the prem at greater than 100 megabits per second symmetrical. So that was 100% of our GREAT grant projects, fiber to the home or prem, and greater than, and all of these locations should be able to get access to 100 megabits per second download and upload speeds, symmetrical. So I think that's an important clarification, because that's what we reported. That there is that's also what we reported to U.S. Treasury.
Okay, seeing no other questions, I just want to wrap up and thank everyone for attending. Thank you for the great questions. If you have additional questions, you can reach us at greatgrant@nc.gov. Again, these slides and the recorded webinar will be placed on our website, and we will make sure to email you all, as well as email you all the link to register for those consultation hours. Thank you all again so much. I hope you have a great week.